Tiffany asked about something that I mentioned to several of you, and I did not even think about discussing this with you all about Excel when you were doing your t-tests for the paired sample or independent samples. When you get a result that they give you a number that's like 6.7321 with a capital E and a number behind it, either a dash or a plus sign with a number behind it, that is Excel's notation for scientific notation. If you remember back in your science classes, if you had really, really large values or really, really small decimal values, they would use scientific notation to help express those numbers so that you didn't have like point with 14 zeros and then some numbers after it, or maybe even more than that. So, or like 1257 with 25 zeros following it. They would use the scientific notation to help represent those numbers. Well, that's what that is for Excel. And so some of you found that your p-values were like, I said, like something like 6.732 E, and then a dash, which is supposed to be a minus, and then maybe a point or a minus 0.5. So what that means is that you would have point, and then you would have 5 places. Well, actually, you would put 4 zeros, and then the first number that was there, like the 6 point, the 6 would be the 5th number, and then those other numbers that followed the 6 in that initial part. This is really great. Let me do this. Let me see if I can put it here. So I said like 6.3215 e to the minus 0.5. Looks like e dash 0.5. That's equal to 0.00006321. Okay, so can you guys see that? Which way do I need to go? That way? That way. There we go. That's what that means. And that dash between the E and the 0, that's a negative, which is like a negative exponent. So that what that's standing for is the 6.3215 times 10 to the minus 5 power. And that is the same as 0.000062315. So the 5 there represents 5 decimal places to the right of the decimal. And if it was a plus, it would be 5 to the left of the decimal, which would make it a larger number. But with these, it's going to always be some small number. So what happens then is, if that's what your p-value was, p-values like this are always going to be way less than 0.05. And so that means then that you have a significant value or a significant difference on your t-test. So I'm not seeing Tiffany's face right now. I'm going to transition over and see, since she specifically asked the question. Hi, Evan. Hi, Philip. So Tiffany, does that make sense now? Do you recall that from back in the day? I'm sure if you didn't talk about that in your math classes at some point, that you would have done that in a science class, because that notation's used a lot in science, but it's not done in the format that Excel does it. And I apologize for not remembering to explain that to you all before I set you off to do your assignment, because made it a little bit confusing, but now we know, so we'll remember, and we'll be able to carry on. This evening, I think everyone is here now that will be able to be here. Casey may be able to join us if her board meeting gets over before we're finished this evening. If her board meeting is like our board meetings used to be, I doubt that she'll be able to join us because we were always a couple of hours in our board meetings. I have 6 folks who are going to present this evening, and that will leave, let's see, Aaron, Jared, Evan, Philip, and Casey then to do their presentations next week. So what I would like to do, we're going to begin with Bo, and I'm going to share this screen with her so that she can pull up her presentation. Okay, Bo, you ought to be able to share your screen with us now. And
yes.
Got it?
I think so.
Okay. Can everybody hear Bo okay? Okay, she'll have about 10 minutes to speak, and then when she's done, we'll have a little conversation about her presentation for a few minutes. So if you've got something in mind you want to ask, keep it in mind. Okay, Bo, go.
Okay, perfect. Small disclaimer before we start. I did misspell a word in the PowerPoint. I can't even remember what it was off the top of my head. But I did, and there's a mistake there. Also, I wanted to let you guys know that after further reviewing the data, I misspoke on my last couple slides. There were multiple children who did not make significant growth or growth at all, or maybe even went down. So I just wanted to throw that out there. And then let me see can everybody see it? Okay. Hopefully this works.
Hi, this is Bo Kirchhoff, and I first want to thank the Board of Education for being here. We appreciate everything you do for our school and all the time and effort and love you do for all of the Warrensburg School District. I'm Bo Kirchhoff. I'm a 2nd grade teacher here at Ridgeview Elementary. I want to share with you guys a data project I've been working on in 2nd grade with our oral reading fluency. So in 2nd grade, we work on our oral reading fluency throughout the entire school year. This year, I just compared the August and January data, so first semester data for oral reading fluency. Oral reading fluency is based on our DIBELS oral reading fluency. That's the curriculum we're using for this. It's a 60-second passage, and each individual gets the same passage no matter what level they're on. So it's standardized, and we use the passages, the scoring, and the procedures of DIBELS. Oral reading fluency is something, again, that we do each month, and the passage increases in difficulty throughout the school year. So each month it gets harder for the students, and you're going to see that in our data as well. But why do we do this each month? So we progress monitor our oral reading fluency in addition to other skills that we are working on to help guide our instruction. We want to be making data-based decisions in every aspect of our teaching. So that's why we do this each month. With our RTI, or response to intervention model that we're using, we're not just working on oral reading fluency. Again, it's comprehension, it's phonics, it's phonemic awareness for all students, even the ones on 504s and IEPs. We're touching every one of these students unless they are MAP A. So during this school year, we want to create the best instructional environment to help students become more successful and give them the instruction they need. So how much growth did students show throughout the semester? That's my question that I want to find out. But in addition to that, in PLC, here are the questions that we always ask ourselves as educators and as a community of learners in 2nd grade and all levels of instruction in the Warrensburg School District or PLC model. So what do we expect our students to learn? How will we know they're learning? How will we respond when they don't learn? And how will we respond if they already know it? So this is an August data sample, or August sample of the oral reading fluency passage. So this is pretty simple. The text is not hard to read at all. January, the words increase in difficulty and there are more words as well. So in our data, just so that you're aware, the expectation increases and with the level of difficulty of the passage. So below basic in August is 0 to 36. In January, it's 0 words to 54 words in 1 minute. So in 60 seconds, that would be a below basic score if you score within those parameters. Basic in August is 37 words to 67 words. January is 55 words to 90 words. And again, these passages get harder each month. Proficient or advanced, 68 words plus in August, and January is 91 words plus to become proficient or advanced. So it's not easy. It is a challenge for all students. Here are my data results for the 30 students in my classroom plus 5 students in another classroom. I have 26 students in my second grade classroom. However, one of my students is MAPA. My student that I'm talking about is nonverbal. So obviously this is not something, not an expectation for that student. But for the other 25 of my students, it is. And then the 5 of these other second grade students, same. We have expectations for them. You can see the August data compared to the January data here. And it shows the growth. There is only one student here who did not show growth, almost stayed the same. But again, the passages are more difficult and the student was not having a good day. So our words per minute percentages of students. In January, we moved students, and throughout the semester, we moved students out of the below basic range over to basic. You can see that right here with that percentage change, 3%. So that's really exciting to see that. That's the goal, is to get students out of the below basic and basic range over to proficient or advanced. So although the data doesn't look that significant, this is our first year using this model of curriculum for phonemic awareness, phonics, instruction, and comprehension. It's something that we haven't done before. But I will say 9 students less in the below basic range from August to January, that is something to celebrate. Because the students who are in the below basic range, those are the students who do need the most help behaviorally, academically. And we're not just teaching oral reading fluency all day. We're not just teaching math all day. We're teaching to the whole child, to the whole student. And that one student who didn't show growth from August to January, that one particular student is a student that is tier 3. He does have behavior issues. He does have academic issues. And we were dealing with something outside of academics that day. However, that was the day that we were all testing in second grade. And he had been absent before that previously. So you can just kind of understand a little bit of a picture of what that student kind of goes through at school and even at home. But here is the data, a nice little visual for you to see the change in our growth as well. Okay, so in second grade, we do a lot of student celebrations. And without inviting all the parents in, we use an app called Seesaw. and students are able to record themselves a video of themselves explaining why they're contacting their parents and why they're so excited. So this particular student started off only reading 9 words per minute at the beginning of the school year. In March, I know that's not what I'm analyzing, but that doesn't matter because this student has made so much growth. The student is on a 504 plan for dyslexia, has behavior issues. I think that might be a lot of task avoidance because of the dyslexia. And from 9 words per minute to 32 words in 1 minute with the difficulty of the DRA level increase on the passage. So that's incredible. However, that is still in the below basic range. But to me, I don't care. I'm okay with her being in the below basic range because look at the growth. That's what we want to see. Each student has their own trajectory, and we want to see growth in individuals as well. And we're going to celebrate those goals. I said if she made it to 30 words per minute, I would scream and jump up and down. I really just wanted her to get to 20. And she said, well, what if I get to 30? And I said, I would be screaming, jumping up and down. So of course I did that. And then we recorded and sent it off to mom and dad. So what I found is 10 students of the students that we analyzed are on a 504 IEP. Each passage increases in difficulty again, and students did show growth throughout the semester. Whoops. I'm not trying to show you a map of Warrensburg. 29 out of 30 students made some sort of growth, and I think that's something to celebrate over because we have had so many changes over this school year, and the changes just keep happening, but we have seen growth within what we've been doing with our new curriculum. If you guys have any questions or concerns, please let me know, and thank you so much for your time.
All right. If you guys have any questions, let me know.
Philip has a question.
I just want to throw a comment. I like how you recognize the growth in students. Being a special needs teacher, we want them all to achieve as much as they possibly can. But just knowing, hey, we started from 0 and got to 20. That's huge growth. And I like how you recognize the growth and not so much on where you want them to be, I guess. So.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. And I think that's, it alleviates pressure from them too, without really knowing where they're supposed to be, but just making individual goals themselves.
And in my experience, it's good. It's easier to give positive feedback that all the kids need to. So I like how you did that though.
Thanks, Philip.
Bo, I have a quick question. Do you track that data from year to year with each class that you have?
Yes, I do.
So comparatively, I'm sure that you see that some classes come in much lower or much higher, and it depends on the conglomerate of students you probably have in class on where they're at. So does that make it difficult, or do you adjust the way that you get at that assessment each year?
So the assessment is standardized, so it'll be the same each year, but the way we teach changes based on each student. So whenever we are assessing, we're not just assessing oral reading fluency, we're assessing how they can break up phonemes and how they hear the sounds, or if they don't hear the sounds, everything like that. So there's a lot that goes into it. And then we group them in small groups. And so we're doing what's called Pathways to Reading. I don't know if you guys have heard of that, but It is a comprehensive curriculum, but at the same time, it's very flexible so that you're able to meet your students' needs and differentiate in your groups. So if that makes sense, no, but yes, we do change up the way we teach.
But I think that what I hear you guys saying, what you're asking is, oh, this group, we hear that throughout the years. Oh, this is a tough group. They're a low group. But then I think that goes back to the really great point that Philip made about, well, it's all about growth. I mean, we have those labels because the state and everybody way more important than us says we have to, but it's all about growth. And so even if your starting point is lower, if you're still making those consistent gains, I think that's what really matters.
Exactly. And that's what matters in our school. So we do the STAR reading assessment. I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with STAR reading and STAR math, but each student has a trajectory and a goal, and you want to see them, of course, go up. The expectation or student growth percentile, the SGP, that we're trying to see in each student is 35. So that is more of a comprehension-based test too, but the expectation is still 35 no matter where they start, unless they don't qualify for that test, and then they'll do the early literacy program, but then there's still an expectation of growth. So exactly what you guys are saying, even if they are a low group, they still have the same expectation of growth. And I think the lower ones even show more growth on those tests because they are starting off so low, and those gains that they make, it just brings them up higher.
Any other questions or comments for Bo? Your conversation is excellent, and I really liked that you started out by saying, Bo, that your instruction is data based, and you are personalizing for those children. And I know that we have a mix of folks in this class who have worked at the elementary level and at the secondary level. I was a secondary level person and went to a district level job where I was working kindergarten, well, pre-K through 12th grade with all the content areas. And reading is very complex, and it is the foundation of just about everything else that we learn. And so I learned a lot from elementary reading teachers about not only teaching reading, but all of the different content areas, how you have to have that foundation, and you have to have personalized learning, because when you start looking at the student data, every student has a different set of skills, and so you have to work on the ones that they're lacking in. So that was a very good presentation. Thank you for that. If there aren't any other questions, I think we'll move on and let Tiffany give her presentation. And I think the screen should be where you can bring your, I think it's shared, Tiffany. In the meantime, if anybody had another comment or question for Bo, if you'll just speak up, would be great. Okay, I'm going to turn off my mic, and Tiffany will let you continue.
Okay, now can you hear me? Okay, sorry about that. Okay, so before I get started, I just wanted to kind of explain how I came to choose the topic that I've chosen. I received my specialist at Missouri State, and I did an ethnographic case study where I kind of followed this at-risk student at the at-risk school in Nixa for the whole year, and just kind of told his story and how complex trauma played into his academic achievement and his life in general. So that's kind of where my heart is with at-risk. So then I moved back home to West Plains, and I went to our alternative high school, and I noticed that they use the computer program Acellus. I don't know if you're familiar with that. So basically, at this alternative school, so far they just do computer program. There's not any traditional teaching And that just blew me away. I could not believe it, like in a bad way. I didn't like that. And so we're actually changing the approach at that school next year to a more traditional approach where they do face-to-face interactive instruction. And so what I would like to do for my dissertation is, I don't know, I'm just saying ideas. I don't have anything ironed out, but I'd like to somehow do a case study of the transformation of this alternative school. So that's why for this project, I chose to take a look at 2 different groups and from 2 different socioeconomic backgrounds and how their scores compared. Because I used 30 kids from this alternative school and 30 from the regular high school. Okay, so can you guys see that? Did it change? Okay, thank you. So my topic is that I took the 2018 EOC Algebra 2 and English 2 scores, and I compared them. And the data points were chosen randomly from 30 kids, 30 free and reduced and 30 full pay students. Sorry, it's taking a second to switch each slide. I'm not sure why. Okay. So the purpose of this study, or this project, was just to examine the differences in the assessment results between the full pay and free and reduced groups. And the intended audience, if I was really doing this, I envisioned it being school leaders, the cabinet members, superintendent, assistant superintendent, curriculum directors, principals, and kind of bring their attention to this. And then eventually I envisioned this information being presented to the teachers. Okay, so I had 2 questions that kind of went with this project. And the first one is, how do the socioeconomic factors affect the academic achievement of the students? And how large is that assessment result gap between the free and reduced and the full pay students? Okay, so I did a frequency, I took the data and I created frequency graphs. And so in the orange, you'll see that those are for English 2. At the top is the full pay, and then at the bottom is the free and reduced. And over in the blue, those are, oh, that should say Algebra 2. I'm so sorry, over here, that should say Algebra 2. And so it just shows you how many kids, how many students scored within the class boundaries. Okay. I'm so sorry, this is so slow tonight. Okay, so then I ran the descriptive statistics for ELA and for math, and I'll kind of go over more of what I gathered from that in the next couple slides. Okay, so the average for English 2 was close. There wasn't much of a difference, but for math, there was an almost 13-point difference in their average score. And the mode definitely showed a significant difference. The full pay group mode was 26 points higher in English 2 and 14 points higher in Algebra 2. And it did have a high standard deviation, and that just told me that the data is more spread out across the range. So for my findings, it seems to me, and to be honest, I don't understand this part. Obviously, a lot more goes into this than my just little analysis of this, but the socioeconomic factors didn't seem to play a huge role in English, the English academic achievement, but it definitely did in Algebra 2. And so I found that ironic because I always struggled in math, so I thought, well, of course it did. So I'm not sure why that is. That would need further study. And the assessment result gap between the full pay and free and reduced is quite large in Algebra 2, almost 13 points higher. And there is a difference in English 2, but it's not as significant. And so finally, then I kind of asked, well, how would we use these results? If I really was presenting this to my intended audience, what would we do? So to me, the most obvious thing is the difference in the algebra academic achievement between free and reduced and full pay. So I kind of decided we need to ask ourselves 2 tough questions. Are we teaching to the middle only? We never mean to. And I know we all work really hard at differentiated instruction and meeting all different learning levels, but that's really hard. You know, when I was in the classroom, that was tough. And as an instructional coach, it's difficult. And my second question is, how are we differentiating our instruction to meet the needs of all styles, different learning styles, and all the needs of the kids? And that differentiated instruction, that's something that I will study for the rest of my life, because I think it's something that I always need help with. And I was glad to hear Bo mention the PLC questions, because my last part kind of centered around that too. I just said that we need to recommit ourselves to holding true to the 4 questions, but especially question number 3. So how will we respond when they don't learn? So it's obvious that our free and reduced kids are really struggling in Algebra 2. So we need to figure out what we're going to do, because if they're not achieving, so what do we do? So my final thought, I said, if we continue to challenge our high flyers, but also provide those specific interventions that come from PLC question number 3, then finally the kids will have an equal chance to succeed no matter their background. That's all I have.
Questions or comments for Tiffany?
Yeah, I got a quick question. What kind of schedule are you guys on, or do those kids go to? Is it a rotating block, or is it 7-period day?
They have a 7-period day, but when they're in like their English class, they literally are just sitting at a computer, and it's not Zooming, it's nothing interactive like this. It's just that Acellus is just a program they sit and listen. Then they go to their next class, and that's what they're doing. But we're changing that. I threw it.
One of the things we have done quite a bit at our school with our demographic, we have a huge free and reduced lunch population, and our math EOC scores are significantly lower than our full pay kids. We've done some research on that as well. What we found as a big factor was their attendance rate, because it seemed that missing, I mean, if I'm a kid with 84% attendance, that affected math more than it affected English. So missing consecutive days in math was a big deal.
I think that's a really good point. And like I said, I'm not a math whiz, but you know, I remember math just in high school, every single thing would build on top of the day before. So if you missed something, man, I could see how you really would fall behind. So that's a great point.
I think that's one of the struggles that we've talked as administration with this virus and our grading, that math is something that we are really worried about because it is foundational, and we're afraid of just giving kids grades for participation, and then they're going to go into the higher math class next semester, and we're really worried about our EOC, like John said, our EOC scores in that area are a little bit lower, but what are they going to be moving forward when, you know, we have kids that some are participating and some aren't in math right now online. And I think that's something that we've had daily discussions about with our administration team and our teachers.
Those are really good comments. And I agree with what you said, that that's what I taught, high school math. I taught that Algebra 2, and I know that there is, I think the gap even at the lower grades is larger for the free and reduced students in math than it may be in English language arts. And I think part of it is because of that foundational piece. Tiffany tapped on something that I think also is a part in our culture. It's not uncommon for people to say, oh, I'm just not good at math, or they might even say I didn't get the math gene, or something along those lines. And that is, I don't know if I've mentioned her in this class or not, but Jo Bowler out of Stanford University. She's a peer of Carol Dweck's there at Stanford. That's one of her crusades, is to convince the American public that we all have the same genes when it comes to math, and that some people just like it better than other people do, but that we can all do it. But that is a cultural thing for us to overcome. I think we get because of the way math does build on itself. I think you're right. I think if you get lost someplace, then that's like reading though. It takes me back to Bo's presentation on the reading. If you don't have all of the components and that strong foundation, then it makes it difficult. So I guess there's a commonality to approach there among those. But any other questions for Tiffany?
I just had a comment, Tiffany. I like how you took this and you took your findings and weren't afraid to kind of rock the boat and say, hey, what if we do something different? That takes a lot of guts, and it's good that you did that.
Well, it could have backfired, but I still have a job, so so far so good. But thank you.
Very good presentation. Very good. And I'm excited that you're interested still in your topic from your specialist enough to pursue it on a little bit bigger level here. And it sounds like a perfect fit that you ended up where you are and that they needed what they did and you're working toward that. So that's great. That's a good fit. Okay, Nicole, if you want to pop yours up. If anybody else has something for Tiffany, just while Nicole's putting her presentation up, just speak up and ask Tiffany.
You guys see that?
Yes.
Okay. So at the beginning of the semester for statistics, 2 sets of data that I wanted to look at was our freshman attendance and how is that at all correlated to credits earned their first semester of classes. So just because of the timing, I couldn't look at a student's entire year of credits earned. But our district is really looking at graduation rates and credit deficient students and what can we do to assist and help those students when they fall behind. And so I'm really interested in, especially, I can probably think of, 6 kids in our freshman class right now that are going to finish this year with 1 credit or less. And so that just puts them behind, in the next 3 years. And so wanted to look at that and if there was any correlation with their attendance. So the attendance that I looked at, was students in the 60 to 85% attendance range. We do a modified rolling 8 block. So you don't have the same classes every day. You have 4 classes one day and then 4 classes, a different 4 classes the next day. So just looking at their attendance and seeing if that had a difference on the amount of credits that they earned in the first semester of their freshman year. So my question was, does the amount of time a student spends in school have a negative or positive impact on the amount of credits they earn during their first semester of high school? This was the data that I was able to look at, and I just picked 30 students out of our freshman class that fit into that attendance range. So some were free pay, some were full pay. And as you can see, I thought there would be more of a ascending trend of, the lower attendance percentage that they had than the lower amount of credits that they would earn. And my assumption would have been that the higher attendance they had, more credits that they would have earned in their first semester, and that was not the case. So my results were, after entering the data sets into a graph, it appears that there isn't a relationship with the attendance of the freshman student and the credits that they earned. And then some findings that I was looking at after I thought about it. One, again, I was very surprised to see that there wasn't a relationship. And I kind of talked about, my assumptions already, but, for an example, a student with 76% attendance, they earned 3.75 credits. And without them going to summer school, going into their freshman year, that's the max that they could have earned. When you think of 76%, you're missing a day and a half of school every single week is what it's averaging out to. And then, you had the student that had 81% attendance, and they only earned 1 credit. So they passed 2 classes out of 8 their first semester. So I really would like to look at this data at the end of the year. Of course, I can't really use it this year now due to everything that's happened with, the not going back to school. I don't think that data would be, sufficient enough or consistent. And I also thought there are a number of variables in this. So when I ran the numbers, it doesn't tell me if these students are in all seated classes or if they have 1 or 2 online classes. So when a student takes an online class, we don't really have a way to, take their online attendance. So it just automatically counts as 94%. So that is one way. It wasn't something I thought of at the beginning of the semester, but that definitely could skew averages for a student's attendance based on, it could either help them if they do really well in an online class, or they could have a high % attendance, but not do well in the online class. And then again, I would need to look probably at all of our freshmen, and I mean, it's a big class, but look at all of our students and then look at their credits earned and see what we can do to assist them in that way. That was all I had for my data. Does anybody have any questions?
It's not a question, but just an observation. I really like how at the end in your findings, you talked about the different variables. I think it's nice to see the other things that you, just like, you have to take into account and things to consider. So I thought that was really nice.
Thank you.
I will agree with that, especially that thought about the seated versus the online classes and how the attendance is figured differently, and also how the students might do. They might have a preference and do better in one type of class or the other. Based on that. So that's something that I haven't thought about a lot in the past, but if you have students in both situations, that could make a big difference. So good to identify those. Other comments or questions for Nicole? Okay, very good. We are going to move on to Ashley. We'll let you put yours up. If somebody thinks of a comment or question for Nicole, please just speak up until Ashley starts giving her presentation, and then you have to wait.
Okay, can everybody see my screen? Okay. After seeing some of you guys did a really good job. I think mine's very, very basic, but it was something that I care about. I really care about the school climate and the culture. That's really important to me. I care about staff and students wanting to be there, because if nobody wants to be there, then no one's really going to learn. So it was, for me, what I was curious to see was was there any difference between office referrals, the amount of office referrals that were submitted on Mondays versus Fridays, and we'll go through with that. So as you can see, comparing the amount of office referrals on Monday versus Friday. The question is there a significant increase of office referrals on Friday in comparison with the amount of office referrals on Monday? Sorry, the pictures are covering up part of my PowerPoint. Let me try to get this off. Okay, got it. All right, reasoning 1. On Mondays, teachers and students are generally refreshed from having a break from the weekend. So they have a lot of patience basically on Monday. But on Friday, they're generally stressed out and exhausted from the continual workload during the week, and maybe they have less patience with their students. So I was basically trying to see, for my null hypothesis, of course we know there would be no statistical difference between the number of referrals, and then the alternative hypothesis would be there would be a significant difference between the amount of referrals that we would see. Here is my graph on East Elementary office referrals in 2018-2019. So this is the previous year. As you can see, if you're looking at the data, it's comparing the number of office referrals that are going in this direction and horizontally you're looking at the number of days. We had to have at least 30 days of data. I had 32. Originally, when I started this, I was trying to compare the days, and I think I had already told you guys about this. I was hoping to pair up the Mondays and Fridays per week, but because we have so many days off with holidays and teacher work days that I couldn't really do that. So I just had to kind of pair them up as I could. If you look at the data, it's pretty spread out, but it looks kind of consistent. We really only see one spike here on the date of the 24th, and we see a high number of increase of 12, and that actually was on a Friday. So I ran a t-test to compare both of these, and to see if there was a significant difference between the amount of office referrals. We conducted the t-test on the 2 samples, and I found the critical value for a 2-tailed test. We used the alpha level, of course, of 0.05 so that we could determine a 95% confidence level. The critical value was at plus or minus 2.000. And if you look here down below, I don't know if you can see my little arrow, but the T critical here at the bottom, that's what that is. It's very close to 2. It says 1.99, but that's what it is. Here we're looking at our actual T statistic, though, is what we're going to compare when we look at our curve to see if negative 0.09 is going to be consistent, whether it falls in our critical value or not. So I was actually able to create a curve to show you exactly where it fell. So if you look at this data, this would be our non-critical area. Over to the side, this would be our critical area to the right and our critical area to the left. So as I said, it would have to be +2 or -2 for it to be considered a significant amount of difference. Anything in between would be considered not to have a significant difference. And as you can see, 0.09 would be very, very close to the major part of our data, which would make that not significant. Therefore, we would not reject the null hypothesis, and we did not find a significant amount of difference between Monday or Friday, which surprised me because I thought for sure that we would see a significant amount of data difference in Fridays. I thought there would be a larger number on Friday's referral than there would be on Monday, but there's not. So, and mine's pretty, like I said, it's pretty straightforward. So that's what I have.
Any comments or questions for Ashley?
I thought that was so good, the way you had made the bell curve. I mean, I felt like I was sitting there listening to Dr. Grover. I mean, you know your statistics in and out. That was really great.
Thank you, because I saw you guys, and you guys did so awesome. And I was like, maybe I did this all wrong. And I took a long time trying to find a graph where I could graph it that way, and actually had the original graph the very first time. But all I had to do was uncheck something to make it represent what I wanted it to. And I found that after about 2 hours of doing it the wrong way. So thank you.
Ashley, quick question on your data. On your 32 days that you chose, were those did those correlate to a week and a year?
It was basically 32 Mondays and 32 Fridays. And originally, like I said, I started to pair them. I started pairing them up because that's what I wanted to do, to compare them. So it would be like a legitimate week. And then about 4 weeks into it, I realized I can't do that. And so then I would if I just started pairing them up, okay, well, I have extra Friday here, I'd put it here. And that's what I did. I think if I did further studies on it after doing this and talking to Dr. Grover, I think what I would actually do is say, is there a significant difference and pick a particular event like she had discussed? Because when I was discussing whether it's independent data or dependent, at first I was like, well, it's dependent because it would be Monday versus Friday, but it couldn't be dependent because at that point they weren't in the same week. And so I would have to pick an independent event, if that makes sense. Like, does the prom affect the amount of office referrals on the Friday prior or something like that? But so
interesting that maybe I'm misinterpreting this, but one of the things I looked at in your data is, if I'm thinking about this right, the peak in both of your referrals, whether it was Monday or Friday, occurred what would be in the right around the third quarter-ish, if you're looking at weeks. So that's interesting to me because as an assistant principal, the third quarter is the most difficult for both teachers and students. So your data reflected that with number of referrals. And then you see a decrease in fourth quarter, which is typical because we're wrapping things up, it's testing. So that was interesting.
Right. That's a good point. Thanks.
I thought you did a good job, and mine is very basic as well. You will see next week.
Thank you.
Other questions? Comments? There were a couple things that came out to me for this. First of all, sometimes what looks very basic does have a couple of hours, a couple times over maybe, behind it to make it look so easy. And I agree, Ashley, you explained that perfectly. I think Dr. Grover on a good day would explain it like that, but she makes a lot of mistakes on the other days when she's explaining and has to correct herself. So you did a very nice job on your presentation. There were a couple things that that I thought about as you were talking, and really with Nicole's also, and probably everyone has had some comment about how when you go into, when you were planning your study, then you found out that maybe your data didn't quite work out perfectly for what you wanted to do. And that's, to me, that's the difference between real life data and real life studies and the things that we practice out of the textbook. Because in the textbook, the problems are contrived in such a way that they will, either they're going to just unfold beautifully, perfectly, and it's going to just all be nice, or there will be something that everybody just can't figure out, and it's this one particular point that the textbook writers are wanting to make about maybe you didn't have all of the units of measurement common before you started, like you were talking about months in one part and years in another part, and so you had to come up with a common unit of measurement, or there's some little, you know, little thing they've slipped in there to catch you up on and to make a point for you to remember to do in the future. But other than that, those just usually just, like I said, they unfold beautifully. But when you really are doing a real research project, you come into these things that just don't quite fit. And so you either have to change your problem, change the data that you're going to collect. Sometimes you have to sort of massage your methodology. That's the methodology when you choose the type of data and how you're going to analyze it and so forth. And so this is, in the presentations and going through this process, there's a lot of valuable learning that you all are getting some experience with that will be helpful to you as you work toward writing either either writing your dissertation or possibly presenting data to your district so that you can make some excellent changes on the behalf of students. So I wanted to mention those things before we move on to our next presentation. Does anybody else have anything for Ashley? Okay, Shannon, would you like to go ahead and get your presentation up? And if anybody does think of something for Ashley, as before, just holler. Ashley's saying no, don't ask her any questions.
Can you see that? Okay. Okay. So I took statistical data from our Evaluate program, which is a preparatory testing program we participate in, getting kids ready for the MAP test in fourth quarter. It's provided by Catapult Learning, and you'll see what it looks like when I go in and look at it. So I looked at second grade at North Elementary, 30 kids, pulled a few from another class to complete that data set. The monthly Evaluate test prepares for the MAP test, and Catapult Learning kind of provides the program, and it is also tied to our summer school curriculum. By using Evaluate, we get summer school along with that. So you'll see more about that in a minute. The results of the evaluate testing drive instruction. We do evaluate testing K through 12, actually, I think, or K through high school at some point. And then they take it monthly, and we use it to close the gaps in their learning. And you're able to compare the results bi-monthly. So you'll see in my data it was November compared to January, or it would be December compared to February. Every other month test the same standards. And then it will show the percentage of the concepts mastered. And then the cutoffs are similar to the MAP test with below basic, basic, proficient, advanced. So if I were to go in and look at the evaluate screen, what I see in this example shows you the scores for the school, 2nd through 5th grade. It doesn't have K and 1 because they don't do it monthly, they do it quarterly. But for 2 through 5, this shows the percentage mastered in math and in ELA for January. And I can change it, not here because it's a screenshot, but I can change whatever month I want to look at and compare, or grades, or even by class or by particular student. This one shows you what the student screens look like. This is my son, so I can show that to you. But it will show their score for each month, moving across. And of course, we're looking for growth there. This shows you grade level wise. You can look at the percentage of concepts mastered in each month. And then my objectives for choosing this data, I used it because it was useful, accessible, and important. It's something we actually use all the time. It's relatively comparative because the test is the same for each grade level and each student. I want to familiarize myself with the process and then use the knowledge gained to help our teachers use the evaluate and prep our kids for MAP testing. The things I considered: how does the data compare? Can growth be seen? Does the percentage correlate with the MAP data we expect to see for these students next year as 3rd graders, which ended up changing since we didn't get to finish? And then how does the data compare between classes and grades? So for data collection, I selected one 2nd grade class and compared the November to January evaluate data, and then converted it to Excel. So I used November and January here. And the program actually lets you export to Excel, so that was easy. And you can see the scores here. I exported the data for one class for both November and January, and then organized it from least to greatest, and ran statistical data in Excel using the data analysis tools that Dr. Grover taught us to use. You'll see here in a minute, I wish I hadn't done it this way because it changed my results. I wish I had left it paired by student, because originally this would have been the same student, November score, January score, but when I organized it, that broke the pairing, so it kind of changed my results. But in running the statistics, I could see that some improvement in growth was noted because the median went from 33 in November to 52 in January, and the range improved from 81 in November to 90 in January. If you're looking at percentage, that was growth in percentage. My thoughts on the process and the data: even with some growth, 2 months of data isn't enough to draw a good conclusion. The data began as being paired with 2 scores for each student. And once I organized it, then it was no longer paired, like I said, because I organized it in that way. It's good information, but it would have been more valid and probably better used if I kept it paired. Short-term and long-term, the data is now limited because everything in evaluate is stopped at March. We only had a few students who actually finished it in April, so I can't exactly go back, and there will be no further data for this year. And because of that, state testing wasn't conducted, so I can't compare this to 3rd grade MAP scores. Ideally, yeah, it would have worked, but this is like nothing else, of course. There will be continued state testing, but the process might look different. I don't know what that might be like, but I do know our district will continue to use evaluate under the leadership of our current superintendent. He brought it, and he is very committed to using it. So it's something that we'll be able to use for as long as he's here. In my conclusion, the analysis of this type of data interests me, and I don't know why that's not finished. And I was glad to be able to use it and familiarize myself with the process. I can help the teachers. I kind of wish now that I compared 2nd grade to 3rd grade instead of second grade, same class 2 months, so I could see the growth in grade levels, I could do that a different time. And then, like I said before, I felt it was too limited, doesn't give enough information to make a clear prediction or conclusion, but we did see growth between 2 months, and then I can go in and see that with certain students or different classes, different grade levels. It just wouldn't be a part of this presentation necessarily. So that's all I have.
Okay, questions or comments for Shannon?
Hey, Shannon, I might have missed this, but when you said that you only looked at 2 months of data, why is that? Did it not start at the beginning of the year, or are those just the 2 months that you picked?
Well, honestly, I used the 2 months for the 30 data points comparing one thing to another. But if I had looked at a big study, yeah, we started in September to April. So I could have spanned the whole year. Yeah.
This isn't necessarily about your presentation, but just out of curiosity, how many years has your district been using this program?
This will be the third year for Evaluate. And looking at, they've changed the cutoff scores. I know you probably are familiar with that for MAP. So when they did that, that changed our data in the way that we've been looking at it. So we waited for the Evaluate Catapult to kind of up the ante so that our data would match MAP cutoff. And that just happened this year, but this is the third year we've used it, and we'll probably use it another 3, I would say.
And you really like it? Most teachers?
Yeah, because if you have vertically aligned, and if you're talking first grade to fourth grade, they're familiar with what you're using for testing in a way that's different than if you were to compare DRA testing with STAR testing with something else grade level wise. Everyone's familiar with Evaluate, so it works vertically.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else? I love that you guys are talking about these things this way. I can see that you all are data savvy, that you're using data in your districts. And I love that you're interested in those benchmark assessments and you're considering them compared with MAP scores, and keeping track that as data changes and the assessments change and the benchmarking changes, that you have to be very careful about how you analyze your data based on those things. That's excellent. I can tell you it would be lovely if we ever came to a time where things would be consistent and you could get years and years of longitudinal data, but I think that just doesn't happen. So I'm glad that you guys are thinking that way and talking that way, and I shouldn't be at all surprised. I mean, because you guys are here, you're seeking higher degrees, and those are the folks who usually think about these things and are concerned about them. And so, but it just makes me feel good to hear that kind of talk among teachers. I love to hear this kind of professional networking and collegiality. To me, it's one of the best parts of continuing your education and networking with others. Changing from that type of thing back to the idea of the dissertation piece, this presentation, Shannon, made me think of, and some of the others have too, is we talk about when you're doing a big project like working on your dissertation, and we're working on that methodology and trying to, manage as many things as we possibly can. We find out about the data, we find out what we can get, we change the methodology, we do this, we do that to make everything fit. And then just when everything is going smoothly and you're rolling right along and everything's going great, and some people roll right into degree conferral and they're Dr. so-and-so, and the ball just keeps on rolling. But there are people who, as they're rolling along, a pandemic happens, or an illness in the family happens, or a spouse takes a job in another country and you've got to move, or there are things that happen, and you have to be able to roll with the punches on those things and take the lemons that life may hand you and make lemonade and continue on with that dissertation. And so when you mentioned that about not having the rest of the data for the year and not having the MAP tests because of the situation that we have going on right now, if that's something that would affect your dissertation, then what we do is you and your committee, you sit together and you say, what can we do? What can we do with this data? It's as simple as you get ready to make soup and you're missing an ingredient, and so you start looking in the kitchen. Okay, what else can I do with what I've got here? And you do the same thing with the dissertation. So I wanted to bring that point out to you too. I think it's important that you all know on this journey that there can be bumps and there can be missteps and there can be disappointments, but we continue on, we persevere, and we make the best of the situation and just go on and finish. And in my way of thinking, and this is me I'm being the mom or the grandma or whoever it is now, that to me, that's one of the most important things that you can learn out of the process, is learning how to deal with life that way. And you have to be able to do that if you're going to be an administrator and be a leader in a district and serve students well. So I just wanted to mention that also while we were talking about that. So I love doing this because it brings out these things that we need to think about as we go. So, okay, John, you will be the last one to present for us tonight. So if you want to put yours up, and if anybody else has anything they'd like to say or any questions for Shannon.
All right, can everybody see that? All right, so as we get started, mine, the data that I chose was actually more of where I was at in my job at that particular time when we were asked to gather data. And I currently serve as an assistant principal, but also an AD in the building. And one of my tasks or duties is to submit GPAs for our sports and athletics and activities clubs. And one of the ones that I had noticed each year, because that's ranked in our conference as well, is that traditionally our boys, specifically basketball scores in the rank among the conference has been in the lower half since I've been there. So wanted to try to get down and figure out maybe some factors that went into that. I will foil it for you. I was not very successful in finding those factors, but that was where I started with the data. So what I did is I took the boys basketball team, so 9 through 12, and one of the things that I wanted to compare was their attendance with their GPAs, because what I also noticed and know about where we are is our attendance is lower than a lot of schools in terms of our ADA and our overall 90 out of 90. So wanted to look at their attendance percentage and see if that had any effect specifically with the boys basketball players. So it took 30. We actually had, I think, 32 boys that participated this year. It took 30 of those because 2 of them moved in at different points. So I didn't feel like I had complete data for those 2. And looked at the first semester of 1920. So this school year. Originally, I wanted to take this attendance percentage and GPA comparison from first semester and compare it to second semester because there's a lot of factors that go into that. And the number one is eligibility with students. So my assumption was that first semester data was going to be higher or have a more positive correlation than the second semester data because that would be post-season. And that particular time wouldn't necessarily determine their eligibility because the season would have already ended. Obviously, with where we're at, I was unable to complete that data. So I changed some my question just to see if there was a relationship between attendance percentage and GPA in the first semester. So in looking at that, and I'll come back to this chart, this kind of gives the outlook of GPA ranges on the left-hand side or the vertical side, and then attendance percentages and their range there at the bottom. One of the things that I was actually pretty surprised in is that overall, their cumulative attendance as a team was higher than what our student bodies is. So that was interesting, even though that's not reflected in this chart, but that's one of the things that I looked at as we went through. So I was pleasantly surprised. I expected their attendance to be more in line with our entire student body. So I was pleasantly surprised with their cumulative attendance percentage, because that's data that I don't look at in that capacity. I haven't, we look at building data as far as attendance, but I haven't broken that down to specific sport or activity. And then obviously GPA. One of the things that's kind of unique about that, you can see the frequency of attendance. The majority, 15 of the 30, landed between 97 and 100% attendance, which was, in my opinion, pretty impressive, considering our school attendance, our ADA is less than 92%, and our 90 of 90 is like 78%. So that was encouraging and really surprised me a little bit. But in comparison to that, and looking at GPA ranges, my assumption from the frequency of attendance, that GPAs would be a little bit higher in correlation with that, and I did not find that. You can see the majority, 11 students, fell in the range of 2.01 to 2.61 in terms of their GPA. Obviously, there are a lot of factors that go into that, but combining those and going back to that first original chart, you can see that it's all over the place in terms of attendance percentage and GPAs. I mean, there's a student here that has 99% attendance, and their GPA is 1.9, just under 2. So that's something that surprised me a little bit in looking at this data. So looking at that, it didn't show, sorry, my pictures are in the way. It didn't show a relationship between attendance percentage and GPA. There are low GPAs with low attendance. There are low GPAs with high attendance, and then vice versa. There are high GPAs with low attendance and high GPAs with high attendance. So that was something that was particularly perplexing. I assumed that I would find at least a little bit more a semblance of a correlation there, but I did not. So that's what I said there in number one. My assumption was the higher attendance, the higher the GPA. And I realize that there are many factors that play into that. But specifically, I wanted the goal of this was for me to be able to go to our coach, who's awesome. He does a great job with the kids. He has them doing mandatory tutoring, and we have a fairly at-risk population, and specifically with our boys basketball team, it's a higher at-risk population than most of our other sports in terms of the cross-section of the demographics that make up those student athletes. But the goal of this was to be able to go back to our head coach and say, hey, here's some things that I've been looking at, and here's maybe something that you can hone in on or focus in on to help as an intervention with some of those GPAs that are a little bit lower. And I know that's a struggle for him each year in terms of academic eligibility. So wanted to try to find something that would be helpful for us both moving forward. So my conclusion, I'd like to continue to dive into the relationship of in-season versus out-of-season attendance. So that's one of the things that I'm interested in, because participation in extracurriculars, obviously, something I'm passionate about, and something that I would like to see data of schools that I'm at, because I've looked at national data, and obviously there's a correlation between participation in extra or co-curricular activities and things like attendance, behavior, and grades, but wanted to relate that to the students and programs that I was working with. So that's kind of where I fell, and that's my data.
Okay.
I got a question for you.
Great.
Can you hear me, John?
Yeah, go ahead, Evan.
Do you think that I don't know who your coach is, but does he push attendance pretty hard as far as like, obviously they want to be able to practice, they want to be able to play, those type of things factor into that. But then what I found with the athletes in season is a lot of times their academics do suffer because they put less emphasis on it because they're more worried about the athletic side of things. And on the flip side, they feel like they might get a little more leeway from teachers when they don't end up getting that, and their grades end up suffering because of it. But do you think the coach pushing attendance had more of a bearing on it than anything else?
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Evan. Pushing attendance in season is obviously very important. One, for participation in practice and competitions. But one of the things that I thought would maybe counteract that or bounce off of that is our coach particularly has study sessions weekly with those kids that are struggling in classes with work. And he is one that is very supportive of classroom teachers in the fact that he wants to know if students are not doing what they're supposed to be, especially when it comes to that academic slide during season that you often can see. And a lot of our teachers respond to that and use him as a resource in that regard. So yeah, that's a good point, Evan.
Do you think that without that emphasis he puts on it and communication, that those grades would have been even worse than what you ended up finding?
Oh yeah, 100%. Because with that particular group, and what I was hoping to prove with the data is when second semester ended, compare those two, and I would almost guarantee you that there's a significant difference in both their attendance and GPA out of season.
Hey, Coach, I would agree with that. My experience is dealing with basketball players is during the season they tend to be on top of things a little bit more just because we're following up with them. And I don't want to use the word forcing them, but we have mandatory tutoring sessions for all players. Or actually it's an hour a week. So I would agree with your study there. It'd be interesting to see the study, like you said, in season. But just like I said, just from the naked eye looking at stuff, because we check our players all year long. So grades, whether if they're in another sport or not, if they're playing football or baseball or another sport, we're still following up with them if they play basketball. So that's good. That I'm glad to hear that other schools are doing the same thing we are. But I enjoyed that.
I think it would also be interesting to see, because I was an athlete when I was in school too. So I'm not, I guess I can say I have a right to purport this, but sometimes when you're an athlete, your studies are not as important as playing the game, if that makes sense. So I think it would be an interesting study to also compare maybe students who are not athletes versus the students who are athletes in attendance, to see if there's any correlation between the two, whether they're actual athletes and their attendance versus the ones that are not. I think that would be cool too.
Hey, Coach, did you say that your athletes had better, or at least your basketball players had a higher GPA than your general population?
Higher attendance percentage, not GPA.
Okay.
Another
So
thing
ability level comes into play there a lot, because you could have, obviously, if you did the comparison, like Ashley's talking about, you would probably find that the higher attendance students probably do have higher GPAs a lot of the time. But because, like you said, some of these guys might not come from the best backgrounds, might not have much support. Their GPAs are higher than they would be, like you said, without the pushing from the coaches and stuff. But it's not maybe necessarily, I don't know, just relating just straight attendance to GPA, probably more of an individualized thing, more so than like a broad look at everything, I would think. I don't know. It's interesting though. I like that a lot.
I liked the part you mentioned about that there was a dip in their GPA when they were off season. To me, that would be another great way to take the study. And then like Ashley had mentioned, comparing it athletes to non-athletes. In the non-athletes, is there a dip or is there not? Of course, there's 1,000 factors that go into that, but that would be really neat too.
Yeah, absolutely. That interests me, and not only just athletes, but expanding that to co-curricular things as well, because we have a lot of band students that put in a lot of time, a lot of times more time than our athletes in season, because their performance season goes so long. Same with theater. So that would be interesting to see those that are involved in an activity or athletic event versus those that are not.
I think basketball is interesting for you, John, too, because your second semester grades count for eligibility for the first part of basketball season, but your first semester grades count for your eligibility for second semester. And there's only a few sports that have that carryover. So I think it would be good to see what that comparison is in GPA wise.
Yeah, you're only looking at 3 sports that fall into that we offer, and that's boys and girls basketball, wrestling, boys and girls, and swimming, boys and girls, or actually just girls.
Any other questions for John or comments?
Good job.
Thanks.
That's a good job. You all have done a good job with your data analysis, and I hope that you're finding this helpful to sort of get your minds wrapped around where you want to go and what you're going to do as you move along in your coursework toward your writing your dissertation. Next week we will have Erin and Jared, Evan and Philip and Casey to do their presentations. And so we'll be finishing up with those. Do any of you have any other questions about the presentation process or any of that before yes, Erin?
I don't have a question, but I just want to say to all of you who presented that I enjoyed all the presentations, and just I'm learning so much, and that there's so much to data that, I mean, you could just keep researching and keep comparing and keep finding, I guess. And I didn't really realize, like, what can I do with this? So I just appreciated it and enjoyed all the presentations tonight. So I have trouble sitting still, though. That's why I'm a PE teacher. So I apologize for that.
You can wiggle. We don't care. It's fine.
I was going to stand for a little bit, but
that's okay too.
I need like my bouncy ball. And no, I'm sorry about that. But
I have 2 sons, and my older son, when he was in the 3rd grade, we went in for a parent-teacher conference, and he was one. He wasn't one of the taller kids in his class, but he didn't like to just sit, and so he would stand beside his chair, put his one knee in the seat, and then lean over to do his writing and stuff. And his teacher tried to break him of that at the first of the year, and one of the strategies she used was she put him right in front of her desk. But then he would be doing this thing right in front of her desk, and she said finally she realized if she would just leave him alone and let him do that he did great. So she moved him to the back of the room where he could do that and be able to write. So you guys are talking about, addressing the whole child. Every child is different. Everybody needs their thing. And so you're welcome to wiggle and move and stand.
I stand in faculty meetings, so
that's fine. Okay.
Differentiated instruction.
Yeah.
We gotta have it.
Also, I have a question, Jared. It's Jared, right? You've got that guitar behind you. Do you play?
That's not mine, that's my wife's.
Oh, well, then she needs to play for us, I guess.
But I do not play. I do not sing either. I listen to a mean radio, so. I'm in like the little office. I'm hiding from my children is what I'm doing. So.
Trying to find that quiet spot in the house.
Yes, and I threaten them too. So, yeah.
Oh, you guys are really a fun group, and I would never have thought that you could really get to know people's personalities doing a Zoom class, but I feel like I do know you all. I'd love to meet all of you in person. Hopefully we'll get to do that at some point. Okay, I think for this evening that we're good. I do want to remind you that I will, at least by the 18th, which is, this is the 15th, so Thursday, Friday, at least by Saturday, I will have the final up for you all. I say up, I will email it to you, like I said. And it will be due to me. I'll put the due date on there. I'll give you several days to have that into me. So I'll be getting those ready. And if we have nothing else for the class, then I will see you guys next week at 7 for our last final presentations.
All right.
Everybody good? Okay, have a great week, guys.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye.